You wake up in the middle of the night with that burning sensation that rises up your chest, and you think, how long will I depend on this medicine? This fear is real, and I hear it every week in my office. The good news is that there is a clear reason why your reflux never gets better for good, and a simple solution that starts in your kitchen. I'm Dr. Kevin Vries, and today I will show you what no one has told you about your digestive system. Reflux is not what you think. There is a misconception that has spanned decades of popular medicine and that I see repeated every week in my office. Almost everyone believes that reflux is synonymous with excess stomach acid. But the real story is different, and understanding it can completely change how you deal with this problem. The real point of failure is a structure called the lower esophageal sphincter, a muscular valve at the junction between the esophagus and the stomach. Imagine a floodgate that must close firmly after food passes through. When this muscle loses its tone, when it weakens over time, this floodgate becomes loose and the gastric contents rise. Not because there is too much acid, but because the physical barrier is not fulfilling its function. I need to tell you something that few people hear. Antacids and proton pump inhibitors do not correct this valve. They only reduce the acidity of the liquid that is already rising. The structural problem remains intact, and that is why the reflux returns. It always returns, and over time it can become more aggressive and silent than the simple burning sensation you feel. The danger of reducing gastric acid. Many people come to my office having taken acid inhibitors for years without understanding what this medicine really does to the body. What I see in practice is a chain of new problems created precisely by the prescribed solution. Gastric acid is not the villain of the story. It is one of the most important tools your body has to defend and nourish itself. It breaks down the proteins you eat, activates digestive enzymes, and eliminates bacteria that enter with food. Without it, this system begins to fail. When you suppress this acid with medication, the food reaches the intestine incomplete, poorly digested. Bacteria ferment this material, and the result is a cycle you may already know: bloating, gas, burping, irregular bowel movements. The person takes the medicine to stop the burning and creates a new problem without realizing it. Here comes a detail that almost no one notices. In most cases, the original problem was not excess acid. It was the acid reaching where it shouldn't, due to a weakened valve or habits that put pressure on the stomach. Treating the symptom without attacking the cause is exactly what perpetuates this cycle. Gas and bloating, the intestine fermenting from within. You know that bloated belly that doesn't go away, even hours after eating? That discomfort that makes your clothes tight? The gas that insists on appearing at the wrong time? I see this every week in patients who spend years thinking they have a lazy gut, when the problem starts much earlier, in the stomach. When the stomach does not produce enough acid, it does not break down food properly. This material reaches the small intestine poorly processed, in large pieces, and the intestinal bacteria do what they naturally do with it. They ferment it, like a forgotten fruit in a drawer. This fermentation produces gas, and a lot of it. The result is a hard belly, bloating that hurts to the touch, pressure that builds throughout the day. Here comes a detail that almost no one notices. These symptoms are not an intestinal problem. They are a reflection of what failed up above. Treating only the intestine is like putting out smoke without turning off the fire. The body is clearly warning that the digestive process was not completed where it should have started. Dysbiosis, when bad bacteria take over. There is something that happens in the intestine that rarely appears in medical reports, but that I see as the origin of many of the problems that come to my office. When harmful bacteria begin to dominate the beneficial ones, a state called dysbiosis, the intestinal wall begins to become porous, like a screen with holes. Toxins that should not circulate in the body begin to enter the bloodstream, and the immune system reacts with chronic inflammation. Not an acute inflammation, with fever and clear pain. A silent inflammation, which slowly wears down the tissues and affects the entire organism. A patient of mine, 63 years old, arrived with constant fatigue, joint pain, and a mental fog that she described as thinking underwater. She had consulted 3 specialists. They all said she was fine. The problem was in her gut, and dysbiosis was the root. What makes this state so difficult to identify is precisely this. The symptoms seem to be unrelated. Dull skin, anxiety for no apparent reason, fatigue that does not go away even with rest, unstable mood. The intestine rarely appears as a suspect, and as long as the real cause is not treated, the body continues to pay the price in silence. The solution: ginger, lemon, and honey juice in warm water. After understanding what happens in your digestive system, it is time to talk about what can change this in practice. This combination of ginger, lemon, and honey in warm water is not a fad. It is a synergy of compounds that act on different points of your digestive process at the same time. Ginger stimulates bowel movements, reduces the fermentation that generates gas and bloating, and has a real anti-inflammatory action on the digestive mucosa. Lemon activates bile production and prepares the stomach to receive food more efficiently. Pure honey nourishes beneficial bacteria. Together, the 3 do something that none of them does alone. The recipe is straightforward: a glass of warm water, 1 to 2 centimeters of freshly grated ginger, the juice of half a lemon, and a teaspoon of honey. Take it on an empty stomach, 20 to 30 minutes before breakfast, every day. This timing matters. The empty stomach absorbs the compounds much more efficiently, and your intestine starts the day at a different rhythm. Many of my patients report improvement in the first few weeks without changing anything else in their routine. Ginger, the accelerator of the digestive system. Ginger has been used for millennia, but what science has discovered about it goes far beyond grandma's homemade tea. Inside this root, there are compounds called gingerols and shogols. Difficult names, but think of them as active agents that enter your digestive system and start to organize the house. The effect these substances produce in the stomach is something that few people truly understand. One of the biggest triggers of reflux is a stomach that does not empty properly. When food stays put longer than it should, the pressure increases. The valve separating the stomach from the esophagus begins to give way, and the acid rises. What ginger does is accelerate this gastric emptying. The stomach processes and releases its contents more efficiently. Over more than 15 years of treating patients with digestive complaints, I have seen this change in speed transform the pattern of pain and discomfort for people who had been living with it for decades. Here comes a detail that almost no one notices. Ginger has a carminative effect, a technical way of saying that it dissolves and eliminates the gas accumulated in the digestive tract. And its compounds have a selective antibacterial action. They fight the bad bacteria without destroying the healthy flora you need to preserve. Studies in scientific journals confirm these effects, especially in people with functional dyspepsia, that chronic feeling of heavy and slow digestion with no apparent cause. Ginger is not folklore. It is a tool with real backing. Lemon, acid on the outside, alkalizing on the inside. The lemon deceives those who only look at the label. With the acidity that makes you pucker, everything indicates a food that will acidify the body. But what happens after it is metabolized tells a different story. The residues that the lemon leaves in the body are alkaline, and this silent effect is exactly what is interesting when it comes to digestion and inflammation. Over years in the clinic, I have seen many patients avoiding lemon for fear of worsening their gastritis. I understand the logic, but there is a role that this food plays even before it reaches the stomach. It stimulates the liver to produce bile. Bile is what allows you to break down fats and absorb essential vitamins. Without it working well, digestion becomes heavy, and the feeling that nothing is digesting properly easily sets in. What comes next is the point that almost no one associates with lemon. This food stimulates the vagus nerve, the maestro of the digestive system. It is this nerve that controls the secretion of gastric acid, coordinates intestinal movement, and triggers the production of enzymes. When the vagus nerve is active, everything in the digestive tract operates in harmony. When it is dysregulated, digestion loses its rhythm. And the vitamin C in lemon also acts directly against chronic inflammation, that silent state that erodes the body's balance from within. Honey, the natural prebiotic that feeds the microbiome. There is one thing about honey that most people have never heard. It's not just sweet. Inside a spoonful of pure honey, there is a class of substances called oligosaccharides, which your body practically does not digest. And this, far from being a problem, is exactly the point. These substances arrive intact in the large intestine and become direct food for the beneficial bacteria that live there. This is what we call a prebiotic effect. Over more than 15 years of practice, I have seen how people confuse prebiotic with probiotic. The probiotic is the bacteria itself. The prebiotic is what keeps that bacteria alive and active inside you. When this ecosystem is well nourished, it produces vitamins, regulates the immune system, controls inflammation, and even sends direct signals to the brain, influencing mood and mental clarity. What almost no one realizes is that honey also creates a protective layer over the mucosa of the esophagus and stomach, cushioning the impact of reflux. With proven antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties, it acts as a gentle shield that calms what was inflamed. Warm water, the temperature that activates digestion. Many people choose the right water and mix the right ingredients, but they forget a detail that changes everything: the temperature. It seems irrelevant, but it's not. Early in the morning, when the body is still coming out of its nightly rest, the digestive tract works at a slower and more delicate pace. Putting cold water into this system is like throwing ice on an engine that is still warming up. You create contraction, resistance, irritation. The result appears quickly: discomfort and intestinal slowness. Warm water acts in a completely different way. It relaxes the muscles of the gastrointestinal tract and stimulates peristalsis, which is the wave-like movement that pushes food through the intestine in an orderly manner. I explain to my patients that the intestine works like a corridor with doors. Warm water keeps this corridor open. It hydrates the digestive system gently, preparing the body to absorb what comes next. And when combined with the other ingredients, the effects are potentiated. Each element needs a favorable environment to act, and that is exactly what the right temperature creates. Chewing well, the first step of digestion. The mouth does a job that almost no one takes seriously. It's not just a passageway. It's the real beginning of everything that happens to food inside your body. When you chew slowly, the salivary glands release enzymes that already begin to break down carbohydrates before anything reaches the stomach. The result is that the stomach receives a pre-digested, lighter job to process. When you chew quickly, this pre-processing does not happen and the system starts working above its limit. I see this in my practice with a regularity that worries me. People with reflux, bloating, persistent gas, and when I investigate their habits, chewing almost always appears as an ignored factor. I have patients who tell me they eat lunch in 10 minutes. 10 minutes for a 60-year-old's digestive system to process an entire meal. It's simply not enough. Nutrient absorption depends directly on how food reaches the intestine. If it arrives poorly chewed, the intestine absorbs less and works more. Over time, this leaves real marks: fatigue, a feeling of heaviness after meals, and nutritional deficiencies that appear in tests with no obvious cause. Chewing well is the cheapest and most neglected habit in all of digestion. Do not drink during meals. There is a habit that almost everyone carries without question, and that silently sabotages the work of the stomach. Drinking water during meals seems harmless, but what happens inside tells a different story. When you ingest liquid along with food, it dilutes the gastric juices, which are responsible for breaking down food and absorbing nutrients. Think of it like a pot of broth. If you add water during cooking, the concentration drops and the efficiency is lost. The same thing happens with the stomach. Digestion becomes slow, heavy, and the body has to work harder to do the same job. But there is another effect that I see frequently. The liquid increases the volume inside the stomach, and this volume puts pressure on the valve that separates the stomach from the esophagus. When this pressure is too high, the acid rises. That's when heartburn and reflux appear, that discomfort that many people have normalized without knowing where it comes from. The advice is direct. Drink water up to 30 minutes before eating and wait at least 45 minutes after the meal to drink again. The body adapts quickly, and the improvement in digestion appears in a few days. Gravity and nocturnal reflux. Do not lie down after eating. Lying down right after dinner seems harmless. The body asks for it, the stomach full, the bed calling. But it is precisely at this moment that reflux finds the opening it was waiting for. I see this frequently in my practice. People who wake up with a bitter taste in their mouth, that burning that rises up their chest in the middle of the night, without understanding where it comes from. The answer lies in physics. When you are standing or sitting, gravity works in your favor, keeping the stomach contents in the right place. When you lie down, this protective force loses power. The angle changes, and the acidic juice finds a much easier path to rise up the esophagus. The ideal is to wait at least 2 hours after the last meal before lying down, not 20 minutes, 2 hours. This interval gives the stomach time to begin proper emptying. For those who already suffer from nocturnal reflux, elevating the head of the bed by about 15 centimeters makes a real difference. Not a higher pillow, but the inclination of the entire mattress. A small adjustment, a huge impact on the quality of sleep. Stress, the invisible enemy of the gut. What happens inside the gut when the body goes into alert mode goes beyond what you can imagine. I see this in my practice. Patients who control their diet, choose the right foods, but continue to suffer from irregular digestion and constant discomfort. In many cases, the root is not on the plate, it's in the mind. There is a real connection between the gut and the brain, called the gut-brain axis. When chronic stress takes over, the nervous system enters a state of permanent alert, as if the danger were constant. In this state, digestion is suppressed. Gastric acid becomes dysregulated. Intestinal movement loses its rhythm, and the intestinal walls become more permeable. I often use a simple image. Your digestive system is a factory. When there is a fire in the building, everything stops. Chronic stress is this silent fire. Practices like meditation, deep breathing, and walking activate the nervous system responsible for rest and digestion. It is not mysticism, it is physiology. Managing stress is an essential part of any serious digestive health protocol. Trigger foods that sabotage digestion. Sometimes the problem is not eating too much, but what you are eating. Over many years of treating patients with digestive complaints, I have realized that most cannot identify the culprit, and the discomfort continues with no apparent explanation. Greasy and fried foods delay stomach emptying, like sand in the gears. The pressure increases and the acid finds its way back to the esophagus. Ultra-processed foods irritate the mucosa from the inside. Soda releases gas that puts pressure on the stomach. Alcohol weakens the barrier that separates the esophagus from the stomach. And coffee on an empty stomach stimulates acid before there is any food to work on. Here comes a detail that almost no one notices. Chocolate and mint are also on the list. They relax the esophageal sphincter, which functions as a valve. When it loosens too much, the acid rises. Citrus fruits in excess before bed aggravate this, especially because the body does not compensate for the acidity during sleep. You don't have to eliminate everything at once. Gradual reduction done with consistency produces real results. The liver, the silent maestro of digestion. The liver is one of the hardest working organs in the body, and at the same time, one of the most ignored when it comes to digestion. In my practice, I frequently see people who complain of bloating, gas, and heaviness in the abdomen after meals, without ever having heard a clear explanation of the liver's role in this process. And this silence has real consequences. This organ produces bile, a substance that works like a natural detergent, breaking down fats during digestion. When the liver is overloaded, bile production drops. With less bile available, fats reach the intestine without being well processed, become food for intestinal bacteria, which ferment them and generate gas, bloating, and inflammation. This is where ginger comes in with precision. It has proven hepatoprotective effects. It reduces inflammation in the liver and stimulates both the production and flow of bile. By drinking a single glass with ginger, the body receives simultaneous support for the stomach, the intestine, and the liver. A chain effect that starts in one organ and extends throughout the entire digestion. Gut microbiota, the 40 trillion that govern your health. Inside you lives an entire civilization. It's not a figure of speech. There are about 40 trillion microorganisms in your gut, and they govern functions far beyond digestion. Over more than 15 years of clinical practice, I have learned to see this ecosystem as a control panel for the body. Mood, weight, immunity, mental clarity, everything passes through there. You know that serotonin that everyone associates with the brain? 90% of it is produced in the gut. This means that when this balance is broken, the mind feels it too. What destroys this internal universe is frighteningly common. Frequent antibiotics, a diet low in fiber, excess sugar, alcohol, chronic stress, poor sleep, and a sedentary lifestyle. Most people live with these factors at the same time, without realizing that they are weakening their greatest line of defense. Certain natural substances, such as honey and ginger, act selectively in this process. They nourish beneficial bacteria and hinder the growth of harmful ones. This rebalancing is more accessible than it seems. You don't need a revolution to start. Tomorrow morning, before coffee, prepare this glass. Warm water, ginger, lemon, and honey. That's it. Tell me in the comments, did you already use this combination, or was it a surprise? I want to read your experience. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Every week there is information that my practice has taught me and that you deserve to know. Take good care of yourself, take good care of those you love.